I mean, after being on stage with large guitar amps and huge, backline systems and everything, I got my ass kicked the most when I was in front of a live big band and they hit. And it was because I was getting sonically what was acoustically generated by other human beings. So we've got a big gap right now within the jazz community and within the pop community where what they're hearing and what they're playing, it's like they never experienced it. So the hunger's not there. You seem to know a great deal about the culture that was going on. In other words, what was happening in the jazz world back in, you know a great deal about stuff that was going on in the 50s, even though you were just a kid.
Right, I was 2. I was 2.
Yeah.
So, but I read about it. And I've been fortunate to meet people that were either there firsthand, and I got to meet some people that I never thought I would meet. I had their records. I got to meet and speak with and able to call on the phone. To me, that made the difference. I could call up Lou Donaldson. I could call up John Hendricks. I said, John, I was trying to learn a song, man, but I couldn't get it on the record. Well, play it back for me. It's 40 years ago I wrote the lyric,
Right.
And I got to, sit in with people. I got to be on a couple of gigs with people that I greatly respected and looked up to. So when I would get around them, I would ask questions because I was interested,
So where do you think, where's jazz? Where is it? And you'll hear all the comments. You see these PBS documentaries and everybody's got an opinion on where jazz is. Unfortunately, from my point of view, the opinions are all coming from people in the mainstream. So, it's like,
okay.
What do they know about where something esoteric is? What do you think? Where do you think it is? Where do you think and why?
Wow, that's a big question. And a loaded one too.
Well, what I mean by that, I don't mean why. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to say something's bad and put the blame. I'm not trying to say it's great and give credit to. I'm simply saying that there's clearly a change that happened.
Yeah.
And it was a slow change.
Yeah.
Now, I argue that change was evolutionary. I argue that jazz was at one time mainstream pop.
I agree.
All right?
Yeah.
Now, the question is, did it die out or did it evolve? I tend to think, by listening to the newer, the later artists of that era, that it absolutely evolved into a much more, and I think it's completely misinterpreted now. I believe that the modern jazz that is being performed and composed has not had any connection to the roots of it and to the evolving of it, and somehow or another it got cut off. It's like stopping something when it's still growing. So the artists who are out there now, who are not expanding their knowledge, they're not going to see people. The first thing you have to do, that I've noticed with any of the people that I respect and successful artists, I know a couple of producers who I just completely admire, is they're always listening to someone else. But at the end of the day, it's their calculation. They own the calculator. You can give me the data, but I'm going to prioritize it, not you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what. But there's a lot of the players now seem to be, well, this is what sells. Well, what the hell difference does that make? Are you? If you're a salesman, then fine. Let's just add some, sugar to it, and it can sell anything. So this is where I want to get to the whole thing of jazz. Jazz is dead. Jazz is dead. I don't think jazz is dead at all. I think, if anything, it's becoming more discriminating. It's becoming more discriminating and looking for people with wider creative palettes than pop music is. And I'll tie into this. Like, okay, so yeah, it's just a phase. Jazz was a phase. That's what went on in the 50s, 60s, and then came in, the British invasion, and then came disco and all this other stuff, and that's sheer bullshit. Because, for instance, hip hop. Okay. Oh, well, that was the genre. That was the current genre. I was doing rap records with Tony Pearson, who was called Mr. Magic, in 1978. He was from New Haven, Connecticut. If you look up in the historical chronicles of rap, you'll see he was listed. I was recording him in 1978. It wasn't mainstream. He'd sell a few copies of his LPs to to his regional friends and get a little airplay. The reason why it proliferated to where it is because of socioeconomics. Now, hear me out on this. Okay, so when we would do feature albums, 1980s, okay, and they would go to a predominantly rock audience, and they had a certain socioeconomic demographic, okay, that's where the profit was. So you put $750,000 into a Fleetwood Mac record, okay, but it translated. The return on investment was significant because of the amount of people who would listen to it. It's just socioeconomic. It's like certain things have certain styles. You're going to sell French food to certain people. You're going to sell, other kinds to other people. So what happened was Napster. So Napster comes along, and now you can download it. You don't need to buy your records. You can download it. So who has the computers? Well, if you look at the socioeconomics, it's usually a certain, group of people who they're more employed, they have whatever, but let's put it this way, they have a little bit more money, so they own the computers, all right? So who are you going to lose sales from? You're going to lose sales from that audience because all of a sudden they're not buying their Aerosmith record, they're not buying their John Fogerty record. They're just downloading it for free. So that entire era of music hemorrhaged. Now, the record companies had made a lot of money selling CDs because they converted old catalogs to CD, but that even started to wane as you got into the late 80s and 90s. But they were hemorrhaging because all of a sudden they couldn't sell a physical CD. If you wanted this music, all you had to do was go on and click download, and in 20 minutes, with dial-up, it took a little longer, but you get the album for free. Okay, so you're a business person and someone just said, hey, guess what? Everything we sell, man, it's gone. We have no more profit. There's no more profit. You go, well, what do we do? Well, who's still buying records? Well, I remember back in 1985, 86, I did some records with a big R&B label. We were shipping cassettes and LPs down south in the mid-'80s, to some of these communities because that's what they had. They had their single, remember it was all one piece, the record player here, right, or maybe the cassette, okay? Right. So they were buying product still. So, okay, we need to shift all of our manufacturing into that genre because socioeconomically, they're the ones who are still purchasing music because they couldn't download. They didn't have the wherewithal to buy the equipment to do it. So all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute. We've got these guys out there who are going around with this thing called rap. And they're doing these dates and they're selling these stuff out of their cars. They're selling CDs and everything. Okay, so yeah, but you know what? Instead of spending $750,000, $1 million to do a pop record, we can get one of these things done for $30,000. We just give some guy a couple of turntables, a few mics, set them up in a loft somewhere. They'll pump out a whole record in 3.5 hours or 3.5 days if you want to get crazy. We'll get some really talented mixer guy to come in, a guy like, I don't want to mention any names. I know a couple of them who did very, very well, very, very talented mixers. So now all of a sudden you got a record that costs you $50,000 and okay, you don't sell 4 million. But you sell 100,000, and if it gets mainstream and somehow or another crosses over, you sell 200,000. Point was, it wasn't the music change that moved things from one genre to the other. It's strictly economic. It's happened countless times. All of the country artists now are using LA players from the 1980s. They all moved into Nashville because they couldn't get work because they're better off doing it. And the same thing. excuse me, let me finish that. They're better off economically doing a country record than they are doing a pop record, because same thing. You get down into the real hardcore country. They were some of the last people to come up with the technology, so they weren't downloading. So they were buying records. So there was profit there. Now we've got the phones. They're all, I mean, it's everywhere. And so the whole thing is hemorrhaged. There is absolutely no money to be made in selling physical records. You know, not real money. I mean, you could, sell them to your local friends or people older than us. I don't even think you can buy a CD player anymore. No. But to the point of jazz being something that was a phase, it's less like saying there are people who are still listening to 50s rock today. There's still people listening to country music, old original style country music, not the crossover that's going on now. And you had the fusion era, the Weather Report, and you had those kind of things. So you had all these genres, and at no time have they disappeared. You have Beatles fans out there still buying stuff. You have stuff. I mean, the whole Motown era. People are still listening to it, still getting heavy rotation on a lot of the classic stations. So, but the answer that I'm trying to get to is, so what is it that a lot of the older generation of jazz players are feeling so cynical about?
I don't know. I mean, some people like things to stay the way they are, and some people like things to change. I mean, one of the things that I think about when people say the word jazz, and these aren't my words, they are, but I've heard many musicians, older musicians. This music used to be dance music, so people used to go out to dance to it. That's what people did before television. So that era is over. That part of the era is over. This music was dance music. It was party music. So people don't go out and dance to that kind of music anymore. People are dancing. They're in dance clubs, dancing to disco.
I think it would be frustrating for an artist who grew artistically to feel that they're being marginalized because their audience is shrinking. So what do we all do? Do we just dumb ourselves down?
Well, I guess there's a couple of answers, like from the listener's point of view, from the performer's point of view. Like if you are a dyed-in-the-wool hard bopper, post-bop, well, there's probably not a lot of audience for that right now. So what do? Do you just play what you play and not worry about it? You can, I guess. But what if you need to make a living? So you can play hard bop to a small audience and have a job if you choose to. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to play some esoteric music and make a living at it, it's probably going to be hard to do. I'm not saying that you should go and play, 2 chords just to be accessible, but it's like the wonderful musicians who I hate to categorize, but classical musicians or jazz musicians on the weekends maybe they do weddings. They make money. They need to make money. They need to eat. They need to pay the rent. Do they like to play weddings? Especially, like I said, when I played weddings, it was Gershwin and Cole Porter. Now it's not.
Yeah.
You got to learn. They got to learn new music all the time to make the young bride and groom happy, and the wedding party, and their parents. Their parents are younger than us.
That's the plight of the musicians. And
yes.
That's a choice.
Okay, that's what I meant. I'm looking from a musician's point of view.
Yeah, and I respect that. And that's valuable to this conversation. I'm thinking strictly on the genre of, does it deserve the criticism because it's evolved? Why is it that why is it that whenever something is beyond the reach of the average intellectual effort, call it that, okay? Why is it that when something becomes intellectually more complex and requires a little bit more, I don't even want to say it's intellectual in the sense of just thought process, but your senses, I talked about that earlier with the ability to sense the sounds and sense the tonality and take an emotional connection with it. Every time that gets out of reach, it's demonized. It's because if you don't demonize it, then it forces you to recognize that you're out of touch, or maybe you're not connected, or maybe you're not in the vibe, whatever it may be. That, to me, requires more reflection on the part of the listener than it does compromise on the part of the artist.
Yeah, because some artists are going to do what they do no matter what. So it's up to the listener to either pick up on it or not.
But if they're sincere to the genre, you can't hold that against them. Just,
No.
I mean, look, we're making all of these comments. This is under the assumption that the sincerity and the desire to affect people in an emotional way hasn't changed from 1920 to 2020. Assuming the sincerity is there and the authenticity is there. Let's face it,
The times have changed.
The times have changed, and so it's the amount of information that we take in. So if an artist back in those days was basing their performances and their compositions based on their social standards at the time, which were pretty rough. I mean, jazz artists would, they'd be up all night. They'd go play a gig, and then they'd go have breakfast. They'd get a couple hours sleep and do something. No, it was a hard life. There wasn't much luxury to be had.
Right, especially if they were like on the road in a bus.
Oh, yeah.
Or if they were, black bands, if they were traveling, they couldn't stay in certain hotels.
Right.
They couldn't eat in restaurants. It was a tough life.
It was, but that also spawned the compositions based on that.
Yes.
I mean, so where did the blues come from, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
So now we are where the issues are more complex. They're far more complex now. There's still strife. People are still unhappy. It's just in a different form. There's not poverty in the sense of, oh my God, I'm hungry. That happens still, but it's not the prevalent concern of people who are poor or musicians. Let me stop that. That's not the primary. The primary concern of musicians is not, oh my God, how am I going to eat tomorrow? There's enough things out there. It's kind of rare that you run into a situation like Sammy Davis Jr. did, where his father would feed him candy bars, and how he ended up getting rickets because of the fact that he had no nutrition. We're far away from that, fortunately, and that's a testimony to our country in the United States at this time. But to the point of now we're in 2020, and the concerns are different, and the information is. I mean, how much more do we know now than the average person back in 1920, 1950, 1970, for that matter? So that being said, you can expect the music to be as if we're going to multiply the amount of information and issues, then you can expect that the music is going to take on a similar characteristic. So is jazz dead? Well, that would say then if jazz is dead, then all of the concerns, the primal concerns that people had who were the great artists, are no longer with us. And we know that's not true. Like somebody like Miles, for instance. I mean, look, we know where he got out there.
Yeah, he got out. There's a story about that. Okay, I don't know exactly when it took place, but it was something like, whether it was a critic or a fan approached Miles. It was probably somebody that Miles knew, because Miles didn't talk to people that just approached him. But somebody said, Miles, I guess it was in the 70s, early 70s, mid 70s. He said, you know, Miles, I really dug what you played in the 50s, man. You know, that late 50s, early 60s, man, I really dug what you played. I don't get what you're playing now. And Miles said, do you want me to wait for you? Which is pretty funny.
Wow.
I can say the same thing. I mean, I liked some of his later music, but I liked his more straight-ahead playing. Yeah, but that's just a personal choice.
Well, it's a personal
but
choice.
That's not supposed to stop Miles from going wherever he wants to go.
Because who knows where? Who knows? Just like I'm going to go back to my paintings, metaphor. These guys all lived in poverty. You know, they didn't sell any of their paintings. I mean, during the Impressionist era, a few things got around, and Manet was doing some things, and then Monet later on also. They'd sell paintings here and there. They get a commission here. They get commissioned every now and then. But that should be a lesson to people who want to discount any form of art. 100 years later, the stuff is priceless. 200 years later, a Raphael painting you can't even touch. Yeah. And no one. I mean, it's like they're in museums and and you don't get near them. But you can bet those guys. And please pardon my minimal knowledge of the art world, because I don't want to have anybody put anything in the comments on how many mistakes I'm making. But I'm being metaphorical. I'm just trying to make a general picture. I think that we need to understand, and I think this is more than just art, is that we are stifling people from doing things that could have a timeless impact on the arts, humanity, and everything, because we don't understand what they're saying. And we're trying to hold them back and force them to minimize their statement so that we can understand it. You can you imagine going to see a Shakespeare, going to William Shakespeare and saying, dude, what's this thou art? What is this? What are you saying? I've heard actually kids in English, in English classes in high school say, I can't do this stuff. I don't know what the hell he's saying. I mean, you wouldn't do that, but yet we want to dumb down everything for the common person. Now, to that point, you've got pretty sophisticated tastes. So when you say Miles is out there from you, it's way out there for the average person. And I agree, it gets esoteric. And some people would say, well, he's just up there, I'll use the term again, doing, the masturbatory thing. He's just caring about himself. He's just trying to please himself.
I don't even know. I mean, I don't know what drove Miles to. Maybe Miles might have been really into it. He might have liked it. He might have loved it. He might have been goofing. He might have been, I mean, who knows what goes on.
But he's not the only one. I mean, there were many people who were doing that.
And whatever Miles played at that time, it was the top of that game. They did it better than most. Mm-hmm. Okay, Freddie Hubbard played out, but he knew how to play in. But I've heard that Freddie did it because he knew he could. But he chose to play a melody. But he knew how to play out and still be in, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You can listen to certain players that play out, but you still know where they are in the song, in the composition, if you want to say. You know where they are. Oh, that's the bridge. Okay, they just finished the chorus. Here comes another chorus. Then there's the whole other thing of there is no chorus. They're just playing a vibe. Let's play a vibe in B flat, baby. Wow. I don't understand that. I'm not going to put it down. I don't understand it. I don't get it. That's not my choice. But if that's what they choose to do and they can find an audience for it, have a ball.
But even if they don't find an audience, Meryl Streep in Devil Loves Prada had this scene where her assistant was wearing a green, just a sweater. And have you ever been to, I'll put that aside for a second. Have you ever been to a real fashion show?
No.
Okay. I was fortunate enough to attend a few of them. Okay. And you've seen it though. You see the girls come out with these things with a bunch of peacock feathers on.
They look like peacocks. Yeah.
Just crazy stuff.
Right.
Or they'll come out with it. You'll see the stuff come down the runway, and the first thing you say, who the hell would ever wear that?
Right.
Okay, well, what Meryl Streep did in that thing when this girl was commenting, her assistant was commenting about, in a derogatory way, like, yeah, right. She went into this diatribe, and I don't remember it, but so look it up on movie, and hopefully they'll give me props for saying this. But she talks about how the simple sweater that she got at Kmart or Walmart was a derivative of something that was in a fashion show like 9 years prior or 10 years prior. And she explained to her that this may look, like junk to you, but everything that you see in the fashion world is derived from it. So the true fashion aficionados would see these models coming down the runway with these outrageous, and they would be focusing on certain little things, like maybe the belt width or maybe the, so to the point of when you have these jazz artists and they're going out, maybe they're not really, expecting you to follow along, but maybe you're pulling one little thing out of it that ends up in the pop world. You know what I'm saying? Because it filters down into.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposedly, or one would think that they're trying to express themselves in some kind of way. And somebody might pick up on that, and you're right. It might end up, that lick might become a pop lick.
Well, it also could be the instrument. It could be playing something in it. I mean, what they're doing is they're going. Have you ever heard of prepared piano?
No.
A prepared piano, they'll take a piano like this, and they'll give the students the opportunity to do whatever they want with it. So some of them will actually go on, and their performance is. I saw one where they lit it on fire on a beach. They literally, the guy's playing it, and this thing is starting to blaze, and he's got a full suit on, to protect against, and he just plays it until the flames are so bad that they have to pull him away. It's art. It was an actual, in some universities, the kids will play these things they'll take hammers, and they destroy the pianos, but it's called prepared piano. Now, who would consider that art? But guess what? You get graded on it in some universities. And your facial expression is awesome.
I don't get that down there.
Right.
I don't get that. It's too accessible, because that makes it easy for someone to say, I'm an artist. I demolished the piano today.
Right.
It's demolition. It's not art.
Right. And that's not jazz either, right?
No, man.
Although we do know some people who sound like they're demolishing their instruments.
Well, yeah, they play demolished sevenths.
That's great. This idea of saying something is dead because you don't understand it any longer. That's like, you know what? I'm divorcing my wife. She got her PhD, man. I mean, there's a lot. That's what I'm getting. I think that we have to be a little more open to the fact that, people love to stay away from the third rail thing is, of evolution. Unless, of course, you want to go after some church or something, whatever. But, evolution, as though we all evolve and grow at the same pace as different cultures do, or different people in different parts of the world. And the reality is we don't. We evolve individually. We evolve. Different cultures evolve. Different, you are much more evolved in certain areas than I am. All right. There are people all over the world who are more evolved than I am. There are also a lot of people around the world who are less evolved. And we have to just admit that. And we can't try to break down something that fits a higher, more evolved people just because it's not ours. Because you think, if we let loose on that, think of the things that are going to get torn down. Anything that I don't understand, well, who's the standard? Where's the zero level? And this is where we have to be careful when we use terms like jazz is dead. Because then what's the next thing that's going to be dead? In favor of what? And then we just keep lowering down the bar, and eventually everything is dead except for what the slowest person in the room accepts. And that's where I'm going with it.
too heavy for me, baby.
But your Miles comment was, that's why you're here. I love having you here because your Miles comment was said it was just like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed
to wait for you?
Yeah, I'll just
I mean, I keep going back to those cats because that's what I dig. But I mean, suppose Monk was one of the guys who said, I'm going to play my music. I don't care if it takes the public 20 years to catch up to me.
Yes, exactly.
But he lived. It was difficult for him to live like that. He was just focused on what he was going to
so
play.
Authentic. I mean,
he'll
go down he will go down in the annals of history as he will go down in history.
Oh yeah. Well, he was. I mean, one of my favorite composers. One of my favorite jazzers. I mean, I think that's genius. He came from genius, and that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. I try not to use that word, but I mean, there's a few of those cats.
Do you think James Brown?
Geniuses. I don't know. I mean, James Brown certainly was an innovator.
Yeah.
He was an innovator, and I mean, I saw James Brown in 1971 in Harlem. I went to the Apollo.
Yep.
I was standing in line, a white boy with a big curly hair. The brothers were looking at me like, what's this boy doing here? But I didn't get bothered, and I went in, and it was one of the best shows I ever saw.
Yeah. There was
tight. 2 drummers, dancers. He changed outfits a few times. He was on for a couple of hours.
And they're still trying to imitate him today.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're talking about like sophisticated music, changes, bridges. His music didn't have all of that going on, but let me say, this is a big statement. I never heard a groove that anybody set like James Brown.
Okay.
He could play 2 chords for 20 minutes. I was good with it.
Yeah, right?
I was good with it. I wasn't looking for the bridge.
Right.
Every once in a while, he'd say, take it to the bridge, But he didn't have to because it was tight. It was that it was primal, but you could feel it deep in your soul, you know?
Right. It was a place that
it was sex.
Right.
It was sex.
And some would argue that some of the stuff he did was more on a primal level, but not when you hear the horn arrangements. And, you know what I mean?
Sophisticated stuff.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
This was
it
not.
It wasn't the bassy band, but it didn't have to be the bassy band.
It was evolved. In a certain way, in a different direction.
Right.
That doesn't discount the bassy band.
No, because I dug them.
And you can bet the bassy band didn't go around telling people, James Brown, that shit's dead.
I'm sure the Count Basie dug James Brown. I'm sure.
Right?
I don't know for sure.
Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, right. I bet Count Basie said, man, he's got a hell of a beat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how can you, because you don't understand it, how can you trash it? And how can, and that's in my world, I've seen so much of that where everyone who doesn't feel, because they're not moved by it. That's another thing too. I've cut vocals with people, and you could just, it just makes you want to cry. Some of the stuff, or makes you laugh, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when we did the You album, your newest release, that stuff you did on Since I Fell, that stuff, that was some magical stuff. I felt, we worked hard on that, but
again,
you came up to it.
The reality of it, I might tell a story or two or sing a song that I personalize, and hopefully it's entertaining and fun. And people have come up to me and said, that story you told about I told you I love you, now get out. Was that true? And I would always say, I have the same answer. I said, of course it's true, and if it's not, it ought to be. But when you're in it, it's got to be real to you in that moment. Otherwise, it's just an act.
Yeah. You got to put yourself in that place. Well, look, great actors and actresses do that. I mean, I worked with Chris Plummer a lot, and I thought he was absolutely the quintessential expertise of acting. I mean, he was a Shakespeare-reared actor. He was a very, very highly highly regarded Shakespearean actor, which on the stage is, but him and many people I've worked with in the film industry when I worked, they just take it seriously. They put themselves. I had a woman come in here a couple months ago, and we're doing a film, and she's coming out of a very, very bad situation, and where her son, something happened. And I'm not going to get into it. I don't want to get too anything, but she had to come in here, and we had to do ADR, and she had to just. There was a point where she's driving, and she has to put her hand on her husband's. Her husband puts his hand on hers. She's in the passenger seat, and we had to get her breaths, like her reaction. It was so intense. It was nothing more than her going like that, but it was magical. It was. I told her. I said, this is one of the finest acting pieces I've seen in a long, long time. And it was that simple, but the point is she took it that seriously to know that the reaction of the husband touching her at that horrible moment and trying to console her, and her reaction to it was awesome. So again, to the point of the people who get it are sometimes they're listening to a different, in their head, there's a different voice in there. And maybe that voice is something that we're not capable of hearing.
Could be, yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway. So anyway.
There you are.
There we are. But so if you're playing jazz and you're real, it ain't dead.
No.
It's waiting for you.
No. It's alive.
Love you, man. Always. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
Bye.